Call Her Daddy shows and all these different shows that she went on. I mean, I'm sure they had an impact. But I think that in the future, I'm sure they're scrambling to try to create their own version of this show. Right. This is one thing that keeps coming up, like we need our own Joe Rogan.
Right.
But they had me.
Well, number one, they had you. Number one, they had you. They had you and they drove you away. Is that number one? But they also have, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN.
Right, but that doesn't work anymore.
I know.
That's like, like you're using smoke signals and everybody else has a cell phone.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't work.
Smoke signals? I don't think you can say that anymore, can you? That's tonight's red hot video, of course. Joe Rogan, you may have recognized him, mocking the silly Democrats after Kamala Harris paid the price for standing him up during the campaign. That was not a good call. And not accepting his invitation to be interviewed on his 3-hour-long podcast, President Trump did wonderfully there. Joe Rogan pointing out the irony that liberals are trying to replicate the success of his podcast by creating their own version of Joe Rogan. Kind of hilarious. And, when they once had him on their side, he was a Bernie bro for the love of, before, they went off the deep end, went off the reservation, and Joe Rogan's eyes were opened, and now he's much more like a normal person. Isn't he? He's not a Bernie bro anymore, isn't he? Do you know anything about this guy, Joe Rogan?
I know a little about this guy. I have a frustration with Spotify right now. They have taken away the ability to listen to Joe Rogan on 3.5 speed, which is my normal listening speed. Now it's just 2 times speed. So I've had to go on hiatus until they bring that back. But this is the point. I think
got to create like an innovation, like a switch up.
No. They'll fix it. They watch the show.
Ask Elon to
but
fix
this is actually, I think, the point that Rogan is making here is the left has, they have a product problem. Because Joe Rogan, when he started his podcast, I've been listening to every episode in order, it basically looked like it was filmed in a garage. There was no fancy trappings, whereas the left's podcasts are legitimately bankrolled by private equity and George Soros. So it's not that they don't have the infrastructure that they need, it's that no one is listening to them. That's their problem. It's not that you can't create a Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is, he came to the podcast with a massive following from Fear Factor, from professional fighting, that he continued building up over the years. Democrats are going to try and bootstrap this with like the Pod Save America. I'm sorry, their staff is all trying to unionize. They're all trying to kill each other right now. They're not going to replicate Joe Rogan. They had him. They lost him. Now they paid the price.
Yeah, I do love the fact, and we talked about it last night, that the DNC, I don't love the fact they all got laid off, but hundreds got laid off, and they've set up a Go Fund Yourself page for the people that they fired, and that's kind of funny. But Samantha, the reality is they can't really do this because, and I've been doing 3 hours a day of talk radio for a decade and a half and more, and the problem they have is when you're doing what Joe Rogan does or what I do every day, you have to be able to explain yourself. And
exactly.
They can't, and that's, at NPR, they just read their script like they're slipping into a coma.
The Dow Jones went up 30 points today.
You sound way too excited. You have to be way more boring.
They're on fentanyl. You got to slow that down a bunch. But they can't explain themselves, and that's why they've never been able to do talk radio. Conservatives do talk radio, because you have to be able to explain yourself, and they can't.
Right, and the appeal of these platforms, it doesn't really matter the medium. The appeal of Joe Rogan is the authenticity, the honesty, the fact that there's no topics off limits. And Kamala Harris and other Democrats, they can't perform in a platform or a context like that because they don't want to be honest, they don't want to be authentic, and they can't explain their terrible policies. And so I think it's less about the medium and the, whether it's legacy media or podcasts. They've got a bad product, as you say, a bad message.
And they're used to having everything scripted. Their buddies in the media ask them questions they know about ahead of time, and they give canned answers that their handlers give them ahead of time.